I'm going to do my best in about 15 minutes or so to try to explain the Bhagavad Gita. This is a sacred text in Hinduism. It's viewed as Hindu scripture. It's a text that I think we have to pin to the axial age, or at least this is a text that's been used to help to bolster the kind of identification of an axial age. Karen Armstrong, in the book that you're assigned to read, has a discussion of this toward the very end, and the text itself seems to be a kind of culmination of the ideas she's developing about the axial age, right? And so one of the things that you need to do in the paper that you're writing on these texts is to make a decision whether Armstrong's interpretations are accurate or whether she's leaving some things out. But I think that it's safe to say that this text does a lot of the things that she kind of pins to this idea of the axial age. It's concerned with intent, not just with action, almost to the nth degree, right? And so it's fitting certainly for that conversation. There's some other things that we could talk about. But coming from a Western perspective, it's, I think, often difficult to wrap our minds around these religious traditions that we may not be well acquainted with, right? And so I'm going to try to go through some of the historical context here and look at some key ideas, some key issues in the text. Scholars have debated for a long time over, when to date this text, and they've settled on anywhere from about 400 BCE to about 200 CE. Many have suggested that the text itself was developed over probably many centuries. It is part of this much longer text known as the Mahabharata, which is the longest poem ever written by human beings. At least it's the longest extant one. It's something like 1.8 million words. I have an electronic edition of the Mahabharata. I don't even know if it's the whole thing. And it runs about 9,000 pages, to just give you some sense of how large this thing is, right? The Bhagavad Gita is in book 6 of the Mahabharata out of, I can't remember how many books, 20 or something like that. And it's only a part of book 6, right? So that gives you a sense of the whole scope of the thing. We need to identify, some of the things that went into the development of this text and its ideas. We've talked already about the challenges to Hinduism that occurred in the middle of the first millennium BCE in India. Buddhism and the spread of its popularity, as well as Jainism. Both of these embraced many of the ideas that Hindus also held, but then took them in different directions and rejected some of the, we might say, cultural features of the religion, right? And so Hinduism itself, or the proponents of Hinduism, responding to those challenges, adjusted things. And so we move from a religion that is very ritualistic, very focused on performance of sacrifices to the gods and things, the kind of religion we find depicted in the Vedas, which are these second millennium, kind of late Bronze Age texts, to the Upanishads, which are from the middle of the first millennium BCE, so about 1,000 years, or at least several hundred years after the Vedas, where the emphasis is no longer on just the rituals. It's on the intent, and it delves into, it does include a lot of stories of gods and a lot of devotional prescriptions, but it also talks about the importance of meditation, about pursuing yoga, which is a kind of practice, right? A discipline that would lead one ultimately to, and in the Upanishads, kind of the ultimate life is the life of the ascetic. To do one's duty to one's family, to be a householder is important, but then one should look to escape from that and become an ascetic, particularly later in life, give oneself over to meditation and get beyond karma in some way to achieve moksha. Well, that's where Hinduism was, before the writing of these other sacred Hindu texts, which date from, again, sometime in the late first millennium BCE, perhaps at the very beginning of the first millennium CE. There are these two lengthy poems. One is called the Ramayana, and then the one that Bhagavad Gita comes from, of course, is the Mahabharata. The Ramayana, I would say, is only about a quarter of the length of the Mahabharata, but it is still a tremendously lengthy story. The other part of the context that we need to sort of be aware of here is just this whole millennium-long era that is known as the classical period in India. This is when Indian culture, especially Hindu culture, as well as Buddhist and Jain and these other kind of offshoots of Hinduism, when they reach a high point of development, when India is thriving intellectually, artistically, literarily, and otherwise. Starting with the Mauryan Empire, in the late 4th century or so, after the conquest of Alexander the Great, and to this period of competing kingdoms, when the Mahabharata was written, and then finally to the establishment of the Gupta Empire in the 3rd century CE, which lasts until about 600 in some form, right? That is the period known as classical India. And so, this is from that period. I think we need to be aware that there were these competing kingdoms, that warfare was a constant, and the story of the Mahabharata is, in fact, a story of warfare. So the text itself was written in Sanskrit. You can see a page of parchment here, with a depiction of the war, the Kurukshetra war, which is the kind of backdrop for the Bhagavad Gita and, in fact, the entire Mahabharata. This war is the equivalent for India of the Trojan War for the Greeks and perhaps for Western civilization, all told. The Kurukshetra war was legendarily from the late Vedic age, though its historicity is debated. We're not sure, much as with the Trojan War, whether there really was a Kurukshetra war. If so, it's probably sometime around the end of the 2nd millennium BCE. It took place there were two sides in this that were tied to these dominant families, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And Arjuna, the main character in the Bhagavad Gita, is the leader of the Pandavas. And so it fulfills the same function as the Trojan War does in Western civilization, right? It is written by Brahmins. Brahmins were the educated elites, and so Brahmin perspectives enter into this. The emphasis on mastering philosophical and religious concepts, devotion, meditation, these sorts of things, right? Obviously come from Brahmin culture, but there is an acknowledgement that the Kshatriya, the warriors, have their own valid way of, kind of pursuing God and pursuing devotion. Which takes us to the key themes here, okay? Described in this text in fairly great detail are the kind of core Hindu concepts of samsara, the cycle of birth and rebirth, reincarnation, right? Vishnu or Krishna, as he is identified as here in the text. So this picture is of Krishna, who is supposedly the charioteer of Arjuna, the leader of the Pandavas, but he is actually the 8th avatar, 8th incarnation of the god Vishnu. Okay, and we come to understand this as the text goes on. As Arjuna questions him, Krishna reveals more and more about his own personality and who he really is, right? And sort of portrays himself as the central god in the universe. Okay, that is not the sort of the only understanding of Krishna and where he sits in the Hindu pantheon and in the stories of the gods more generally. But this text is very much centered on the personality of Krishna. And Krishna describes all of this the cycle of samsara for Arjuna. Of course, described in this are also the varnas, the caste system. And these seem to be hard and fast. And one of the things, in fact, that Arjuna is most worried about is that he is violating caste if he participates in this war that he's about to fight. Okay, so we'll look at the text a little bit for that. This text is seen as maybe the culmination of what has been called by scholars the Hindu synthesis. And the Hindu synthesis really is a sort of drawing together of all of the various strands of Hinduism that show up in earlier texts, the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the recognition that there is not one single path that one can follow, that one must follow to get to God, the gods, or to achieve moksha. And this is an important thing. Hinduism is not, its theology is really quite complex. There are many possible paths of devotion, many possible paths to knowledge, many possible paths to enlightenment, many possible paths to along what they call dharma, duty, right? This is not a one-size-fits-all kind of religion. It's actually quite flexible and tied to the culture, tied to the social structure, tied to the caste system, all of these things. One of the things that's emphasized in this text and other texts that are key to the Hindu synthesis is this notion of the gunas. Gunas are characteristics thought to be part of each human being, and in fact of the entire universe. There are 3 of these identified. The first is called sattva, which means something like calmness or harmony, but that coexists with rajas, which means passion, kind of the high-spiritedness, and also with tamas, which means something like ignorance or laziness. That within each person there is a calmness, but also a passion and also an ignorance, and that one must learn how to kind of train these gunas in the right direction. And so this is why there are multiple paths. Yoga, in this case, is not the regimen of, relaxing exercises, or maybe not quite so relaxing. Some yoga is pretty intense. That is an extension of this, but yoga just means discipline. In the text of the Bhagavad Gita, there are several possible paths of discipline that one may follow to achieve moksha, or to come closer to Krishna, right? And these are identified with these terms: jnana, the yoga of knowledge, right? This is achieved through study and through meditation and things like that. Karma yoga, which is the yoga of action, and this is the one especially that Krishna tells Arjuna he ought to follow, because he is a kshatriya, he's a warrior, right? And so to not pursue action as a warrior would be to go against his dharma, against his duty. Bhakti yoga, which is the path of devotion. This is more the kind of thing described in the Vedas, but here this is developed to a greater extent as well, right? That one must pursue devotion, one must pursue the rites. They must do it with the right ideas behind it, or the right intent, but the devotion is important. And then also Raja, the learning how to meditate properly, how to shut out all things that are distractions and come to real enlightenment. And this seems to be in particular a response to Hinduism, or rather to Buddhism, and the challenges that it brings to Hinduism, right? And so there are all of these possible yogas that one must follow, and Arjuna is encouraged by Krishna to not limit himself to one of these. That it's important for him to follow the karma yoga, but at the same time, without Raja and without Jnana and without Bhakti, the karma is not enough. Okay, so again, many possible paths to God. Dharma, I've described already. This means duty. Although duty, that's not perhaps a strong enough or an all-encompassing enough description of what dharma is in the text of the Bhagavad Gita. Dharma is really about achieving oneness with the universe. The concept of Atman, right, which is this part of the cosmic divine that exists in every person. This is separate from what Freud might call the ego, or the concept of self. This is something that is inherent in every individual, in every living thing. But the important thing is to understand that the Atman emerges from what is called the Brahman, which is the cosmic whole. And the Bhagavad Gita is in large part Krishna's counsel on how to rejoin one's Atman to the Brahman. Okay, As I said, Krishna is the central divinity in this text. He is the one who initially, again, looks like just the charioteer of Arjuna, his advisor, but reveals himself as this great God. And as I said, Krishna is an avatar or a manifestation of the god Vishnu, one of the three principal deities in Hinduism. The other two are Brahma, not to be confused with Brahman. Brahma is the creator god, and also Shiva, who is the destroyer god, or the god who is kind of the agent of change in the universe. Krishna is the maintainer or the operator. Hindu friends I've had say that if you use the acronym God, G-O-D, you get these three deities. Brahma is the generator or the creator. Vishnu is the operator, and Shiva is the destroyer. Now that doesn't, take into account all the kind of considerations attached to each one of these deities, but Vishnu certainly is acting as an operator here, trying to push the course of events along. A few parts of the text I think that are important, right? The text starts, and I'm just only going to refer to the first couple of books here, or a couple of chapters. But he starts out with Arjuna's dilemma. He is faced with a battle. He's about to fight even against some of his own family members, and he fears that he is violating sacred things, right? He's going to fight against his own family. That goes against Dharma. He has Dharma, to the family. He says, in the destruction of family, the eternal Dharma of family perishes, right? So I'm going against this. When Dharma perishes, its absence also conquers the whole family. And, this also goes against Varna, right? Caste confusion is born in the corruption of women. The Dharma of caste and the eternal Dharma of family are uprooted by these wrongful acts of family destroyers, since they create a blending of caste, right? This is going to mess everything up, he says, and we shouldn't do this. Well, Krishna's response, Book 2, or the second discourse in the Bhagavad Gita, really gives a kind of summation of everything that follows, and it's developed in further detail, over the rest of the text. And so pay particular attention to the second discourse. Just a couple of parts of this, just to reference quickly. Samsara, right? These bodies have an end, but they are said to belong to the eternal embodied self. That's the Atman and the Brahman, right? The samsara, the bodies have an end, but they don't perish. That which is never lost and cannot be measured. So fight. Don't worry about going against your dharma, right? You have a different dharma to follow, and that is that you are a kshatriya. You need to fight. And don't worry about the consequences. This really is kind of the key, right? The warrior's dharma, let's move on here a little bit, right? For the warrior, he says in stanza 31 here, there can be nothing greater than battle for the sake of dharma. If you will not engage this fight for the sake of dharma, you will have shunned your own dharma and good name and shall cause harm. So it's greater harm for you to not fight than it is to fight, right? It is, in a way, a battle of different dharmas, different loyalties or different duties, but you need to pursue the one that is the most important. And as a warrior, you need to fight. If you are killed, you shall reach heaven, or if you triumph, you shall enjoy the earth. So stand up, son of Kunti, firm in your resolve to fight. And you need to do this, though, with the right intent. And that is where I think we can gain some traction with this idea of an axial age, with the way that Karen Armstrong describes it. Okay, don't be concerned with the fruits of the action. Your authority is in action alone and never in its fruits. You need to do this with the right mindset. All things should be one. You should be focused on achieving Brahman, joining your Atman with the Brahman, right? You must be free of the three gunas. You need to move beyond the limitations that you have as a human being and find unity with the cosmic divine. And I, Krishna, can help you do that, he says, right? In order to do this, that you can't just pursue the karmic yoga, you have to learn to meditate as well, right? There is no insight for one who has not practiced yoga. There's no peace for the one who does not concentrate. And from where does pleasure come for the one who has no peace? Okay, so you've got to learn to meditate. You need to learn to put your mind right. Don't focus on the fruits. Don't focus on the results. Focus on the action itself. Focus on achieving unity with the divine. The person who casts away all desires, who moves away from clinging, who has no idea of mine, and who has no idea of I, that one comes to peace. These verses, by the way, were beloved of Mohandas Gandhi and others, right? And seems to be some pretty sage advice here. If you do this, you achieve the state of Brahman. If one has not reached this, one is confused. Now, this is not the last word. Of course, he spends the next 16 discourses after this describing how to do this in great detail. But this video is running long. Hopefully that gives you a good sense of what this text is about and where to head with it, and maybe how to engage this in the paper that you need to write on it. All right, thanks.